Welcome to this lesson on succession planting. By understanding succession techniques, you can get more out of your garden and have a continuous supply of vegetables throughout the season. Succession planting is a method of planting vegetables continuously to give you a steady supply of produce throughout the whole season and to maximize space in your garden. Traditionally, people plant all their seeds and transplants at one time. This means having everything ready to pick at the same time. Often, you can have too much to eat and preserve all at once, and then have nothing to pick the rest of the season. In contrast, succession planting, you plan your planting time so that you'll have a steady supply of vegetables that you can eat throughout the season. Succession planting has many benefits. When planting multiple successions, your plants last further into the season. We often think we have to get all of our plants in the ground right after that last frost, but there's actually a range of time that seeds and transplants can be put in the ground. If planting all of your cool season vegetables in early April, by June many of those plants will be finished producing, and you'll be waiting well into the summer for your warm season vegetables to be ready to harvest. Succession planting helps extend your season by planting some of those cool season veggies later in the season and harvesting them midsummer, or planting midsummer and harvesting early fall. There are two ways to do succession planting. One way is staggering plants of the same vegetable so that you can continuously harvest that vegetable further into the season. The second way is to focus on maximizing your space by replacing cool season crops with warm season crops as they are finished producing and replacing warm season plants with cool again in the late summer to have a fall harvest. Succession planting takes some careful thought and planning. The most important things to keep in mind are cool versus warm season vegetables, appropriate months for planting different seeds and transplants, days to harvest, and choosing varieties that suit your needs. Let's review the difference between cool and warm season vegetables, because this is a huge part of succession planting. Cool season vegetables thrive in cooler soil temperatures early in the season, and they are less sensitive to frost. They are usually ready to pick sooner and have fewer days to harvest. Days to harvest is how long it takes from the day a seed or transplant is planted until it's ready to be picked and eaten. Many of these vegetables can also be planted again in midsummer. Looking at this map, you can see that mid-Michigan is the color green. Under planting time, we can see that these seeds can be planted anytime between April and May, and then again in July. Warm season vegetables need warmer soil and are very sensitive to frost. Typically, these plants will die if they are exposed to frost and usually take much longer to be ready for harvest, so they need a much longer length of time between being planted and being ready to eat. You do not want to be too eager to plant warm season vegetables early in the spring. Make sure to wait until the last frost date. This seed packet is for tomatoes, and you can see right here that it takes 70 days for a harvest. This table is a great representation of when cool season vegetables are planted compared to warm season. Note that these are general guidelines for each type of vegetable. There are differences between the exact varieties of each vegetable. Make sure to look at your seed packets for your specific varieties to see the dates they recommend to plant. The S's and P's to the left of each vegetable stand for seeds or transplants. Some vegetables are most commonly planted from seeds while others can go either way. This chart can help you decide whether you'd like to try seeds or transplants for each vegetable and when you can plant them in the season. At the top right, we have the vegetables that are in the beet family and the vegetables in the cabbage family. I'll talk a little more about the cabbage family later. As you can see, it's a big family and there are differences between them in whether they should be grown from seeds or transplants. Days to harvest is the amount of days it takes from the time the seed or transplant is planted to when it is ready to be harvested. Days to harvest varies between vegetables. Here's a table that shows the days to harvest and planting times for some common vegetables. Days to harvest will be longer from seed than from transplants, so this table is based on which method of planting is most commonly used. The date ranges can be wide based on the different varieties available, so it's important to know the days to harvest for your specific seeds or transplants. Also, some vegetables mature much more quickly than others. Baby lettuce can be ready in 25 days, whereas winter squash takes the whole season to grow. The vegetables in the cabbage family are great for succession planting. This table shows the many cabbage family members and the most common way of starting them. Cabbage, broccoli, kale, bok choy, collards, and cauliflower can all be planted every few weeks and harvested as one bunch or a head, and then replaced. Broccoli plants will continue to produce heads and smaller side shoots that can be harvested until it gets too hot, in the midsummer when it stops producing. When choosing seeds or transplants, you are choosing a version of that vegetable that has been bred to have certain desirable qualities. So you'll want to pay attention to what variety you are buying and follow the directions on the seed packet or transplant label. You can also look for varieties that can help you get the most out of your plants and garden. Some varieties have shorter days to harvest, which can increase how many successions you can plant. There are varieties that are more tolerant to midsummer heat, so you can continue planting them throughout the whole season. Bush varieties are bred to do well in containers and produce a lot all at once, and some varieties may be more productive than others. Choosing varieties that best fit your space and needs is a great way to set yourself up for success. To better understand the process of succession planting and how you will use days to harvest and planting times to produce more vegetables, we'll go through a sample succession garden plan for a 4x8 raised bed. In this example, I'm going to plant one row of our 4x8 raised bed with spinach, which is 8 square feet of spinach. I will do the first planting of half of the row, so that's 4 square feet, at first, and then the other 4 square feet a few weeks later. This will help spread out your harvest over a longer period of time. Spinach can be planted in early April because it is a cool season plant, and it takes 45 days to harvest. The first planting was on April 1st for the first half of our row, so it will be ready 45 days later, or around May 15th. Once I harvest the spinach, I'll immediately plant it again. So on May 15th, I plant more spinach, and it's ready to harvest around June 30, another 45 days later. Spinach does not do well in midsummer, and it is really hot, so I won't plant it again until August 1st, which will be my fall harvest. My second half of the row will follow the same pattern, but everything will be 2 weeks later. So my first planting for the second half of the row will be on April 15th, 2 weeks after my April 1st planting, and it'll be ready to harvest around May 29th. When that is harvested, I'll immediately plant more on May 29th and have more to harvest on July 12th. Again, I'll wait until August to plant my fall crop, which will be ready to harvest on September 29th. With this plan, I'll be harvesting spinach in May, June, July, and September. Now we'll move on to the next row in my garden, and I'm going to plant carrots, which take a lot longer to be ready for harvest. I'm going to plant them before the first frost date because they are a cool season vegetable and they take 75 days until they can be harvested. They can be planted from April through July. Carrots can be planted closer together and have a long range for planting, so I'll do 3 successions. I'll plant the top of my row on April 1st, the middle 2 weeks later on April 15th, and the bottom 2 weeks later after that on April 29th. As each one comes to harvest, I'll plant more in its place. With 3 successions and replacing harvested carrots, I can have carrots from June through September. Beets are technically a cool season vegetable, but can handle midsummer heat and can therefore be planted from mid-April to mid-July. From seeds, it takes 75 days to harvest. They're similar to carrots in which they take longer to harvest, but can be planted later into the summer. In this example, I started in mid-April, planting the first half of my row on April 15th, ready to harvest on June 29th. On June 29th, I'll plant more that will be ready to harvest on September 12th. I'll plant my second half of the row 2 weeks later, on April 29th, harvest on July 13th, 75 days after planting. I'll replace that harvest with more seeds on July 13th and harvest again on August 27th. I'll have beets to harvest in June, July, August, and September. Broccoli prefers cooler temperatures, so it should be planted in April and May for a spring harvest and July and August for a fall harvest. I'm planting broccoli from transplants because that is the common method and will take less days for a harvest. I planted the first half of my row on April 1st, ready to harvest 55 days later on May 26th. I plant more on May 26th in its place to harvest on June 29th. I won't plant any more on June 29th because it will be too warm, so I'll wait until August to plant for a fall harvest on September 25th. I'll plant the second half of my row 2 weeks later after my first planting, on April 15th, and continue planting like I have in the previous rows, replacing with more broccoli transplants as I harvest. That concludes the season of this 4x8 raised bed. This method provided me with a continuous harvest of spinach, carrots, beets, and broccoli for most of the season, just skipping a few weeks in the hottest part of the summer. Now let's think about the other method of succession planting. In this method, instead of continuously planting the same vegetable to harvest all season, I'll just do one planting of a cool season vegetable, harvest it, and then replace it with something that does well through the summer. When I harvest the summer vegetable, I'll replace it with something that likes cooler fall temperatures. This method makes use of the space in your garden to grow more than one type of vegetable, so you get more variety. In this example, the garden bed changes from spring to summer and summer to fall. In row 1, I planted broccoli transplants in April and harvested them at the end of May. After harvesting my broccoli, I replaced them with beets. Beets planted at the end of May will be ready in early August, which gives me time to use the space to plant spinach for harvest in September. In row 2, I planted carrots in April and will harvest them in early June. In its place, I can put a tomato transplant that will start producing tomatoes in August and continue through late September, or when the weather gets cooler. In row 3, I planted lettuce seeds in April, which take around 60 days to harvest, so I'll harvest in late May and replace with green onions, which are fast growers and can be harvested in late July, leaving plenty of time to plant a fall harvest of Swiss chard that can be planted from seeds at the end of July. Baby chard is ready to eat about 28 days after planting at the end of August. Full-size Swiss chard will be ready in about 55 days at the end of September. My last row, I'll start with kale in the spring, which can be harvested about 28 days as baby kale or about 55 days for full-size kale. Then we can replace it with a cucumber transplant in June to harvest in July and August. Then we will replace the cucumber plant with spinach, which is ready to pick in about 30 days. Even if you didn't make a formal plan to do succession gardening this year, you can still do a late July or early August planting to get a fall harvest. On the left side, we have some of the leafy greens you can plant during this time. On the right are some of the other plants that work great for a midsummer planting. Another way to make the most of your garden space and harvest throughout the season is growing greens for continuous harvest. In a sense, you are succession gardening, but without actually having to plant more seeds or plants. Both cooking greens and salad greens can be grown this way. For greens that are typically eaten cooked like mature kale, collards, and chard, you will harvest the oldest leaves first. The oldest leaves are the outer leaves or the leaves towards the bottom of the plant. Here we see a picture of collard green plants. They have harvested the leaves towards the bottom while keeping the top leaves on the plant. Eventually the bottom leaves will grow back and you will have even more to harvest. You can use this method with baby kale that you might eat raw in a salad. For lettuce and spinach, you can use the cut and come again method. However, instead of lasting throughout the entire season, the plants will regrow between 2 and 5 times. When it seems like the plants are not producing much more, then go ahead and pull out the plant and replant that space with something else. If you want to use the cut and come again method, make sure you leave what is referred to as the crown of the spinach and lettuce, the small inner leaves. On the bottom right, we see a picture of the crown of some head lettuce. On the left, you see the crown of spinach. These are what allow the plants to keep growing. Here's a summary of what we learned about succession planting. Succession planting helps you get more vegetables out of your garden. It creates a continuous harvest all season compared to everything being ready at once. Plant cool season vegetables before the last frost date and again in late summer. Plant warm season vegetables in late May or early June. Use the days to harvest to plan out your successions. Avoid planting cool season vegetables in the hottest part of the season. And experiment with varieties. More tips on succession gardening include: don't be too eager to get plants in the ground. You have a lot more time than you think. Also, replace any plants that are not doing well sooner rather than later. And lastly, at the end of the season, make notes on which vegetables you had too much or too little of, and make changes the following year.